Nice to see you all. Hope you had a good weekend. We'll give it a second while everybody still comes in. Good, we're still listening to you. So you made it, you're the Monday group, you're here on Monday. Any questions about how that's gonna work? Just to go through it one more time, on Wednesday, what's gonna happen is I'm gonna have a class like this with the Wednesday group. When that class is done, Zoom will process the recording. It takes a little while. Once that recording is processed, I will get it uploaded for you to watch. So that's how it'll run. Okay, great. And any questions about locating the homework or the class prep for today? Did that go smoothly? Good, good. Okay, so let's just get warmed up a little bit. I am going to post a link in the chat, and then I'm going to break you up into different groups. Let's see, one second. Okay, what's going to happen is you're going to go into a few breakout rooms, discuss the readings I have on the Google Doc that I just linked to. Can everyone access it, by the way? Okay, good. Once you get in there, discuss with your group what stood out from the readings, what came to the fore about Latin America, about Andean culture, and then just take a few notes and then we'll discuss them all together when you get back. All right. See you in a few minutes. Leah, hi. Are you still there? No, okay, just coming through. All right, for those of you watching this who are part of the Wednesday group, you will now be watching this recording. This is your opportunity to answer a few of the following questions. I am going to share this group document with you in just one second. John, hi, how's it going?
Good, how are you?
Good, just fine. So I've sent everybody into breakout rooms. I'm gonna assign you one and they will catch you up with what's going on.
Okay, great, thank you.
No problem. I'll put you in room 4. All right, see you in a bit.
Thank you, yep, bye.
Okay, back to the async group or the Wednesday group who's now watching this on Monday afternoon, maybe Tuesday. Let me share this screen with you, but you also should have, you're not gonna have the Google Doc in the chat. Okay, I'll send it to you via Slack and or the announcements. You'll have a document there, respond to those questions about the readings, and I'll review it later. Hello, welcome back. All right, while we're waiting for everybody to come in, I took a look at your document, some interesting things popping up. Would one person from each group be willing to kind of walk us through the highlights? For group 1 still finishing their notes, so let's start with group 4.
Okay, I can speak for group 4. So we kind of just talked about how cultures in Latin America are not necessarily defined by the country, but like the region that they're in. And like that includes like food and also just like the way they speak and like their language. And also like architecture, like coastal architecture was different than like the mountain architecture for like various reasons. And how like the crops, like the food was different, but like they like learned how to trade like the fish versus like the stuff they were growing in the mountains. And also how pre-Columbian cultures and civilizations still do have an influence on like the lives and art today, and it's not just like Western influence. Like they didn't just totally wipe everything out.
Perfect. I'm going to stop you there just in case everyone has repeating things. But thank you for those 2 points. That's fantastic. Great. Okay, next group. Group 3. What did you guys have?
We just spoke on how there were so many different aspects from every different reading. You could see it for different regions. You could see that they all created so many different things, and it was cool to see all the videos and see how these people created their own fabrics and their irrigation systems and created, you know, figures out of religious reasoning and what they believed in. We also said that Latin American art is not considered modern. And
Tell me more about that one.
That one, I can't remember who in the group talked about that one. They had more of a
Oh, I was talking about in our group, and I was kind of talking about less about not being considered modern, but how Latin American art often isn't considered Western. And like the piece mentioned that like Frida Kahlo's work had been considered like in the Western canon because it like adopted certain Western practices and then kind of morphed them. But there were a lot of other Latin American artists that weren't considered in like the Western artistic tradition. And then also like after a certain period of time, then they weren't considered Western anymore. So it's like an interesting label that it kind of complicated.
Yeah, absolutely. Great point. It's very complicated who gets labeled where, and Western is very complicated, right? What's really technically being said is Northern, because they're looking at, does this group of work have anything to say with what happened in North America and Europe? But why does that matter? Why couldn't they be doing their own thing? It's a funny way. It's a real old school way of looking at it. Great point. Okay, good. What about group 2? Would anyone like to speak for group 2?
Yeah, I can speak for our group. So one of the things that a couple of us actually mentioned was how far the history goes back. And I don't think it's something that you would realize just off the surface level. But it's impressive that a lot was still standing. And I know that they talked about that in the video. But really how much is like still around and all that went into it, because you could tell that they were good at what they did and they really knew what they were doing. So that's very impressive.
Yeah, great. There you're talking about Chavin, I think, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay, great. Good. And group 1?
We were talking about how the elevation had a lot of effects with the artistic like choices that they had, whether it's like the structure they were building or the materials they were using. And then we also found that it was interesting how a lot of art is also used for practical use, such as like ceramics and textiles.
Yeah, great point. There's this dual function in these very early cultures, and also this very direct impetus to design, right? We'll see that as we move through. Good. Okay, anything else that stood out for them from the readings that someone wants to bring to the fore? Nope. All right. Okay, we'll move on then. I'm going to share my screen with you. 1 second. All right, so as you know from the title of the module and from your readings, today we are looking at ceremonial architecture. Now, some of this architecture is so very old. You know, we're looking at in the early period, 5,000 to 3,000 BCE, which is 7,000 years ago. If you think about the peoples of 7,000 years ago, what's the first kind of architecture that comes to mind? Having not seen this work, what would you think people are building 7,000 years ago?
Pyramids.
Pyramids, yeah, great point. Pyramids come to mind.
Yeah,
What
like
else?
temples or something, like the Aztec temples.
Yeah, yep, great, good point. What about the everyday people? What are they building?
Like wheels and stuff.
Yeah, great point. So sort of early engineering, early technical mechanisms and systems. Good.
Probably homes. Trying to
Homes.
expand.
Yeah, great. Excellent point, Johannes. So probably homes. And the vast majority of people at this time, 7,000 years ago, those homes are probably quite simple. They're probably using resources in the immediate area. And for the most part, those are going to be things that have been destroyed over time. We don't see what everybody was building. We just see what the power structures were building, right? We see what the people with authority, with the ability to gather large groups of laborers, we really are just seeing like, what did the 1% make? And we want to keep that in mind as we look at architectural history, that we're not seeing the whole picture. But it's through things like archaeology, art and architecture history that we get to see more and more about what life was like at that time. All right, so here's where we're going today. We're looking at two primary architectural sites. We're looking at Caral and Chavin. The art objects we're considering are textiles, bas-relief, stele, and contour rivalry. We'll get into what each of those are. Some of the tools you'll be picking up as we go is we're going to do an introduction to plan, section, and elevation. And you'll get your first introduction to the axial plan today. All right, we're going to start in Caral, which is the oldest known city in the Americas. As you read in one of those kind of news, press release, scientific articles, this is a recent discovery. There were a handful of civilizations around the world that were considered the founding civilizations. And we have an idea of where those were, right? This discovery of Caral really changed things in so many ways. First of all, it's important to note that Caral is one of the only sites where the civilization is thought to have come together peaceably. Most of the main places, like let's say Mesopotamia, it's thought that that civilization came together through war and conquest, that part of the building and construction of these larger civilizations happened through violent means. Caral, something very different is happening, and we'll see that with the architecture itself. How many of you have been to Peru, have an interest in Peruvian things? Anybody? All right. So these are just a few of the things from Peru that come into our everyday life, right? It's also part of the mainstay of the Peruvian diet in this period that we're looking at, this pre-ceramic Andean period. Potatoes, and just take a look at these crazy potatoes in the upper left, right? These are not your typical grocery store potatoes. Some of those things look like berries, fruits, I don't know what kind of mess. Just fascinating variety of things, right? Then we've got guava, avocados, and several different types of squash that were not only used for food, but were used for storage, for food service, and as you can see, for decorative art. Okay, where are we? First, let's just take a look at the geography in place. Just from the image alone, what's happening in Caral? Where is it?
In a valley.
Yep, it's in a valley. Great. What else?
It has a river come across it.
Yes, exactly. We have a river, a water source moving through. What else?
It's not very far from the shore, perhaps.
Yeah, excellent. Right. We can see the shoreline in the far, far distance. No one in Caral would have been able to see it from where they are, but we can from Google Earth. Good. What else? Just looking at the image, what do we know about the region around this site?
Is it around the Andes Mountain or?
Oops, sorry.
Oh, Chico.
Okay.
I can go.
Okay, good. Sorry, I couldn't see it. You've seen my notification.
No, you're good. It says it's like surrounded by a lot of plains, which could mean that there's a lot of animals in the area.
Okay, right. We've got animals. We've got plains. There was another comment coming through. Johannes, you're muted, I think. Okay.
I was saying, like, is it near the Andes Mountain?
Yeah, totally. We're in the Andes Mountains. And what we can see from this image, what I'm driving at, is the fact that this is also a region of farmland, right? We can see that from the way this is landscaped. We have these different little quilt-like squares that show us what's happening now, and it also is an indicator for what happened then. All right. Not only is there Corral, there are 8 other sites in this region. And those sites, we don't really understand exactly how they were connected. It's not, we don't have a text record that says, okay, Corral is the capital and these 7 other cities paid tax or tribute to this major site. We don't have that information. But what we do know is what we know through archaeological evidence of trade. We can see that animals, meat products were traded with the coast, for example, and through all of these fish bones and things that have been found in the city of Corral, we know that there was a reverse trade coming from the coast up into the mountains. This is also the first civilization to build their economy on a plant that couldn't be used for food and it couldn't be used to build. No other major civilization has done that, right? If you think about, okay, what's the major food source that bulwarked the American Midwest? Anybody?
Is it corn?
Corn is one for sure. Great. Corn originated in Mexico and in Mesoamerica, but it certainly came into fruition later. But we also think about it as the bread belt, right? Because wheat was the primary driver. So there we've got corn and wheat. These are things people eat. And it makes perfect sense that you'd be able to build a robust civilization when you had large food stores. But Corral is doing something very different. They are taking the first civilizational risk, the first like economic and entrepreneurial risk, where they said, we're gonna go all in on cotton and we're gonna use that to trade. It's really unique in the world. They were able to do this through advanced irrigation. Someone want to tell me what they learned from one of the videos about irrigation? Let's see, Matt or Annie or Cole?
Weren't they able to like use some of the streams from the Andes to like irrigate their crops?
Yeah, absolutely. So they took this thing that is already flowing through the valley and began to dam it up, control the stream, move the way that water was working. This is 7,000 years ago, right? This is just like a crazy, well, it's something that we do in the Anthropocene, right? We're moving materials around for our own use. And this is a really early example of that. And out of that, we get this very robust cotton region. We know about the importance of cotton, again, through this art and archaeological evidence. The earliest form, it's a little creepy, but the earliest form of mummification in the world, like we think about mummies in Egypt, but actually the very first place that it happened is here in Corral, in this region. They let the bodies dry out, decompose completely. Then they used rope that they had made from their cotton resources to bind those bones back together. Then they made like a body-shaped suit and stuffed it with cotton. And we'll see this again and again in many cultures, but it's out of this practice of keeping your ancestors with you, this idea that they strengthen you moving forward. It's not intuitive for us now in the modern period, but in the same way that if someone you love has passed, you keep them with you through memory. At this point, they kept them with them physically. And often, kind of hanging out in the living room. Weird, but there it is. Okay, and then we also have one more example of how cotton was used in these absolutely stunning ways for the time period. So does anyone want to tell me what's going on with this middle image? Can you see my mouse? Maybe Lily or Cecile or George? Your reading doesn't have to be complex. First time you've seen it, just off the cuff. What shows up?
It's a snake, right?
Say it again.
A snake?
Yeah, absolutely. We've got a snake. We might even have two snakes, right? We've got their little heads here. What else is happening? Lily, did you want to speak to it?
I was just gonna say, in addition to that, it just looks like symbols together that's supposed to represent something.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have not only just like a straightforward, here's a snake, I like snakes, I'll put a snake on my rug. The snake is saying something. What else is in the image with those snakes? It's a little tricky to read from this orientation, but does anybody else see it? Let's see, maybe Gabby or Charlie or Colleen. Anybody?
You said from the one in the middle?
Yeah, still in the middle, with the one in the middle. In addition to the snakes, what else is showing up there?
It's like, I don't want to say like a spider-like like thing, but it looks like I don't know if it's a god or.
Yeah. Okay, so we've got a thing with multiple legs, right? That's giving you the spider. I think that's what's giving you the spider image. It's actually crabs. And the reason that's important is because crabs are coastal entities, right? They're not coming from up in the mountains. So we have this visualization of the snake intertwined, two snakes maybe intertwined with two crabs. These are aggressive little animals, right? There's something symbolic happening. Either we've got a representation of two intertwined cultures, we have two intertwined predators, and that representation has been thought out in detail. This isn't the first time whoever made this textile sat down to do it. If you've ever done graphic art or you've done any kind of logo design or anything like that, you don't come up with this on your first shot, right? And this is in 2500 BCE. So one of the earliest places in the world making textiles has clearly been making it even longer than that, because this is not a design that they came up with yesterday and then executed. Same thing's happening with this eagle and snake on the right. These are real simple, and if you're walking through an archaeology museum, you're probably just gonna pass right by because it's a rug with some animals on it. But what it tells us about is, it tells us religious symbolism. It tells us about hierarchies, right? We've got this predatory bird. We've got the snake. There's something being communicated there. Whether we can read it or not would take some time getting to know the culture a bit more. All right, let's get to the site map of Corral. First time looking at a site map. Again, I don't expect you to be experts with it, but what are we seeing here generally?
To me, it looks very spacious. I would expect it to be closer for some reason.
Great point, great point. So we can tell by the size of these tiny little trees. They look tiny, but they're full-size trees, right? We can start to guess at the distances, and you're right. These different sites are spread out. What else?
Like I see, like, because I feel like there's like bigger buildings and they're like clustered together. Like there's like smaller clusters and then like big spaces. And then also like on the outskirts, on the bottom left, like there's some like much smaller houses, which I know the reading mentioned something about how like the commoners built their like smaller, more humble homes like on the outskirts.
Yep, absolutely. And we can imagine if we had some of those saved materials, right? We can imagine that some of them are probably made out of that earthen foundation that's below all these sites, and they have just worn away with time and we can't see them. They might be either interspersed within these buildings, or as you said, Kathleen, around the periphery? Okay, good. So just like technically what we're seeing is a top-down vision of this site, right? It's as if we were flying over in an airplane, we're looking down at it, and someone did line drawings for us. That's what we're technically seeing. That's generally what a site map will do. Okay, now we're seeing, right, a Google Earth projection of the site. And you start to do, we can see, okay, something intentional happened here. These look like, I mean, they could be mountains, but they've got a pretty regular geometry that stands out. It's not like the sky just happened on its own in nature, so you start to key into what's happening here. And now we'll drive into really the heart of the Corral site, which is the Pyramid Mayor. First, just looking at it, what stands out about this site? I'll give you a better image.
It's so big and like tall.
The circle kind of like reminds me of like one of the fighting arenas that they used to build like in Rome and stuff.
Oh, nice. Yeah, good point. Good point. So we have this sort of arena overlay, this idea of performance even in that space. Good. What else?
Yeah, I mean, I think it just looks like something that was, it's built for a reason. And the circle makes me think that it's just a bunch of people coming together doing something there.
Yeah.
Just focusing on something.
Terrific. Terrific. It's clearly like a gathering spot in some way for something. Good.
It seems to like look over like the other part of the sites.
Yeah, nice. Tell me, it's exactly right, Alex. Tell me how you're seeing it.
I was just thinking like it's so tall that it seems like right at the edge of the site, and so it'd be like looking over everything else.
Yeah, exactly. And we also get a little bit of an elevation idea, right? This is going to be those beautiful cotton fields that they're growing, and they're kind of watching over them from up here.
Just a little add-on to that, it's kind of like very different from the Western Church where they were located in the center of the town. This kind of looks like they're in a suburban area and far away from the central.
Interesting point. We don't know we don't know exactly how the orientation is between where people live and where this practice is happening, but we do know that people would journey for thousands of miles. And at that time, that's no small thing, right? To get to these ceremonial sites. Great. All right. So, this is all messed up. Sorry about that. Okay, first of all, as you pointed out, we're looking at a sunken circular courtyard. It's about 114 feet across. What's something that's approximately that size that you can get in mind? It's about 100 feet in distance.
Football field.
Yeah, football field, right? So it's a span of a football field. So you can imagine how many people could fit in this circular space. Then around that, we've got this elevated platform. And while they're a little difficult to see, what else is the primary structure that's still remaining on the site?
Stairs.
Stairs, right? Good. And the stairs are all lined up in this really nice continuous line, moving from here to here to here. So we start to see what's going to happen here, right? There's some sort of progression taking place. The designer of this building, the architect, the builder, the engineer, too early for them to be called architects, but whoever is coming up with this plan, right? They're filtering bodies. The site is designed to move bodies in a particular way. Not only are bodies intended to move in a particular way, eyes are intended to move in a particular way, right? So out in the middle of this site, out in the middle of Corral, we have this monolith. And a monolith is simply like a solid, massive, upright piece of stone. It's often carved, but it's all one mass. And they're usually meant to symbolize the sacred. Okay, I've sort of drawn it out for you here. What's supposed to happen between that monolith and those mountains behind?
It seems like there could be some type of, ceremonial, progression or, ritual.
Yeah, exactly. There is an intent toward ritual here, and it's a very particular one. During the summer and winter solstice, the sun is going to rise behind this mountain. It's going to come up, and it's going to seem as if this monolith, this mountain, and the sun are all in direct conversation with each other. We'll see this practice of solar alignment evolve as we move through from this very ancient site all the way, actually, we still do it in the present day. But all of this is to say that there's a careful thought and orientation to this site. If you're going to take a guess, what's the purpose of all that? Why would someone take all this time to figure out how bodies and eyes and everything should move and be oriented?
Is this some form of like timekeeping, perhaps?
Absolutely, there is a timekeeping relationship because we have it marking out the solstice, at summer and winter solstice, and it looks very much like we might mark time if we didn't have a clock or otherwise, right? Great. What else?
Would it be because they're doing it for like religious reasons and like doing it for a higher power?
Absolutely. And what does that do? Like, what does that do when you, as a religious entity, this sort of priestly class, right? Not only are they, it's not that they're just saying, here's a thing we know is true, and we want to tell you about this thing that we know is true. They're getting geology involved, right? They're getting architecture involved. They're really creating a ceremonial space that goes beyond just the building they've created to encompass this whole region, actually, giving it a sense of involvement, purpose. We'll keep looking at that. Here's another overview where you can just see, this is the site we just looked at. There's several other pyramids like this, and of course they have degraded over time. They would have been much taller. At the top were very elaborate, smaller rooms that smaller and smaller groups of people could meet in or spend time in together. We'll see in one of the next sites exactly what they might have been doing in there. There's an amphitheater complex, right? Where we had that football field. Now we have one that's like 4 times that size for more and more people to gather in there. And we can imagine that they're gathering for a religious purpose. But what's the circle for? Why the solar orientation? Let's just continue to push on this and see it in more detail. Before we do that, as you read today, a lot of the times this period is called pre-ceramic. Any issues? What do you think when I tell you this is pre-ceramic? First and foremost, it means what? Ashley, or let's see, Izzy, or Gabby?
I guess just that. I mean, it literally just means that they weren't working with like ceramic materials yet. So there was still a focus on like textiles and sewing and using, I guess, like the things that they could at that time.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. That's totally straightforward, but it's also kind of weird, right? Why would you call a thing a pre-ceramic? Like we wouldn't have called 100 years ago the pre-internet stage. No, we'd call it whatever the technology was that was there. So what are the options? They could call it the textile age, right? This is an era when cotton textiles are going nuts. As far as the rest of the world is concerned, advanced things are happening here that aren't happening elsewhere. The other thing that we're seeing, obviously, is that monumental architecture is also huge. Could have been called the era of monumental architecture. So the pre-ceramic is part of bringing this site into context with other sites, right? So you can see what's happening where around the globe. It doesn't really describe what is happening, it just describes what's not. All right. Do you have paper or a pen or a pencil or an iPad or something that you can do a little drawing on? If not, take a minute, get up and grab some. Okay, good. Everybody's coming back, getting situated. Okay, so now this is a tool you will use if you haven't used before throughout the class, in any future architectural history class, and then going forward in your life, if you ever decide you need to better understand a building, build a custom home for yourself, or make plans for a business based on where you want people to be in space in your offices, etc. That will change a lot now after COVID. We might not have as many office buildings being built, but nonetheless, it's a very important thing to know. All right, first of all, a plan. Based on what you're seeing over here of these two plans, someone want to take a stab at what a plan is?
Is it kind of like a blueprint almost? Like,
yeah, exactly.
Not a lot of specific details.
Yeah, blueprints are generally large prints of plans. Great. So what does that mean? What does it mean to say it's a blueprint or that it's a plan?
That you're focused on the structural integrity and you're wanting people to be able to easily use the space.
Yeah, we're mapping out relationships in space, right? And we're doing that again from this sort of bird's eye view. We're looking as if we took the roof off the top of a building, or we took floor by floor off the top of a building, and we're just looking straight down into a plan. So this is a plan, for example, for a theater. You have theater seats. You have rooms off to the side. Excuse me, I did that wrong. You have theater seats out here. You have the stage itself, actually the space for the stage itself, rooms off to the side on one floor. Next floor down, seats, more detail on the stage, more rooms on the sides. And here in a section, which is where you take a building, you cut it in half like a dollhouse and open it up. You know, sometimes dollhouses have a hinge in the middle and then you just open, and you can see into each side. This is one of those sides where we're seeing a section, just as if someone cut right down the middle of a building into that stage, those different rooms, all the different floors. An elevation is the front. It's generally the front. You can have a side elevation, you can have a back elevation, but what we're looking at, I should say it's not a front, it's the exterior. We're looking at the exterior of a building. So plan, section, elevation. All right. Now let's do plan, section, and elevation with the cake. An elevation of a cake is going to look something like this. It's actually an axial image, but the plan of a cake is going to look like this. This is the cake from the very top. This is the cake stand sticking out. Pretty straightforward. Cake section, again, you take that cake, you cut it in half, you open it up, and in this case, you see these lovely rainbow stripe layers inside with a little cream cheese frosting in between. An elevation drawing of the cake is just looking at the cake head on, and you're not going to see the curvature, right? You just basically, if you looked carefully and you stripped away what you know about the cake, it's going to look like a rectangle. All right. Got it? Any questions on that? This is going to be your turn in a second. Okay. All right, I've got my plan section and elevation of the cake. I've made an elevation drawing of a house for you. Draw a section of a house and draw a plan. Please draw them large enough that when you put them up to the screen, we can see them, that they're bigger than this. All right, take a few minutes. For those of you who are doing this recording asynchronously, for those of you who are in the Wednesday group, this is also your opportunity to draw a section of a house and a plan of a house. And you can just upload those drawings into Slack, or you can email them to me when you get them done. Nice. Okay, great. Howard's got one ready. Looks good. Okay, great. We've got a section. This is a multi-storied house, right, Charlie? Yep, great. Plan, excellent. Maybe a table or a small round, some object in the middle of the floor. Good. Great, Frank. Okay, good. Multi-story house again with some parts of furniture in there. Good. And Leah, I can see your plan. That looks great. Good. Okay, Lily, great. Tell me, yep, plan and section. Yeah, terrific. Let's see, Izzy, section and plan, George, yep. Yep. Okay, good, good. Got the idea, right? Good. Kathleen, Bridget, got it. Alex, I can't see yours. Let's see. Okay, good. Yep. Ashley, everybody. Annie, looks good. Cole, terrific. Terrific. Okay, right. How many of you are still drawing? Johannes, I think, and Matt. Okay. Yeah, okay. Great. Okay, those of you who are still drawing, I'm going to let you email them into me when you finish, unless you're ready. Yeah, Matt, okay. Nice, very nice. Okay, terrific. So you've got the idea. This is going to come up again and again and again. You will have opportunities to practice again and again, and you'll need to be able to identify when we look at a site, the plan, section, and elevation. And this will become old hat the further we get into the class. Okay, too fast, too fast. We're now moving on to Chavin. This is a ceremonial center founded by the Chavin people between 1200 BCE and 200 BCE. It's located about 1,200 miles north of Lima, modern day Lima in Peru, right? Got it mapped out for you over here. Again, close to the coast, but a little ways inland. And for that time in history, a long ways inland, because they're not just driving to the coast. It's about 10,000 feet in elevation, super high. And once you get to that elevation, not a lot grows. It's not a rich agricultural land. So instead, there is a lot of animal grazing going on there. And the people, again, are trading animals for food sources from elsewhere. When we look at an architectural site, there are 4 primary things we're considering. I'm going to have them mapped out here for you. In a way, we're looking at geology and geography. We're looking at the site itself, which means the way that the building, project, architecture in question is placed on the land. We're looking at the architecture, and we're thinking about culture.
I just had a question. So are these people, the Chavin people, different from the Carol civilization?
Yeah, the Karasupe people. So they are seen to be, the Karasupe are seen, there's a lot of debate about this, but they're seen to be sort of like the culture, or like the earliest culture of this region, and that many of the peoples around are descendants of those cultures. So the Chavin people are most likely descendants of the Karasupe people. And the styles begin to merge over time. And by the time we get to where we are now, all of this is known as the Chavin style. And that's because it spreads throughout the rest of the region as well. A great question. There's a continuity.
Okay, thank you.
There's a lot of debate. Some people will tell you they're not in any way related, but for the purposes of the course, we'll just go with the continuity. Okay, so what sort of architectural drawing are we looking at on the left?
A plan.
Plan. Excellent, because we're looking at it from the top down. And we're looking at two different plans, right? We have a detailed plan of a particular work of architecture, and then we have that same work of architecture put in its geographical context. And then we have an image here on the right. So what do we know about the site from those three images? What's going on here?
Again,
sorry, go ahead, John.
Again, there seems to be a lot of farmland, like the last one we looked at.
In this case, they have created farmland now. At the time, it wouldn't have been farmed, but yes, exactly. You can see that now. It would have been grazing land, different grazing land at the time. Good. What else? Let's see, Cole or Johannes or Bridget? Anybody?
In the top, I like see like it almost seems like a cluster of homes. I don't even know if that is what it is. But it's interesting because everything else is more spread out, and then that's kind of like very clustered together.
Yeah, great. And to be fair, that's again a modern circumstance. I should be.
Yeah,
more
it also.
Go ahead.
Sorry. I was just looking. It looks like a bunch of different pathways. It's like very compartmentalized.
Yeah, great. So it's dense, and there's a reason that it's dense. It is located between two rivers. You can see that, or at the split, where two rivers split off from one main river, right? If you're founding a place where you're going to live again, right, you're always going to choose a site near water. And then, as you've been pointing to with these neighborhoods, these regions, different pathways, it's very dense, and we can see that a little bit better from future images, but I'm going to stick with this for now. These rivers are incredibly important to the rationale for the site at all. What are we looking at here? This is a little more complex drawing. It's not one that we've examined, but it's a combination of two.
Is the lower part of the picture supposed to be like underground?
No, I can see why that might come from these. But basically, what kind of architectural drawing are we looking at?
Like a 3D image, and that'll be a combination of plan and section.
Excellent. Great work, Howard. Good. Okay, so we're looking at a plan and section of this temple at Chavin. So what can you recognize from the previous ceremonial sites that we looked at in Corral? What's similar?
The sunken place.
Yeah, right. We have this sunken courtyard, particularly the round one, right? We saw that over and over. And then we have this large sunken square plaza here on the left of the image.
It looks like there's still stairs and changes in elevation.
Yeah, great. So we have, okay, that first site was built between 5,000 and 3,000. This one's way up in 1200 BCE. But we can see a carryover of culture as you were kind of asking about, Lily, like what's the continuity between these two sites, we can see that there is some, at least in terms of architectural style. This circular plaza is something that or circular courtyard is something that happens at higher elevation. The square happens at lower elevation. And because they have the two, we can see that whoever is working on this site over time is trying to blend cultures, trying to blend regional styles, maybe even trying to bring two disparate groups of people together into this site, right? As you said too, we have this alignment of stairs going on, and that's really fundamental to the craziness that's going to happen inside this temple. We have this courtyard, we have the alignment. This is the old, or the earliest temple on the site. And the architecture, if you took it and, if it was flat on a piece of paper, you could fold it in half along this central line, which is the axis, and they'd be two identical sides. We call that an axial plan. Whenever you can just fold it up and it's the same on one side or the other, it's longitudinally symmetric, right? It's an axial plan. What is the other benefit? What else can you imagine happening? Why would you set up your building in this way? Why would it be beneficial to have an axial plan, particularly if it runs from east to west?
Would it have anything to do with like the sun setting?
Yeah, absolutely, right? The sun's gonna rise in the east, it's gonna move over the building, set in the west. So again, we have this like intention built into the architecture. Not only is the sun gonna rise in that outer courtyard, or rise behind you in that outer courtyard, and then it's gonna come up over your head and then shine down those middle stairs. It's going to shine into those stairs. Here we're looking at a elevation of a sort, right? The participants, this is going to be a group of participants, religious participants, who walked and traveled for miles to get to Chavin. This is like one of the most sacred sites of the region. They get there early before dawn so that they can be there for the rising of the sun. The building is again set up to create this sensory response in the participants who are there. After they've spent time in the courtyard, they climb up these stairs and then they go down into an incredibly dark building. They move up, this is abbreviated, but they move up from this outer pathway. They're going to come down into this central long corridor inside this temple until they approach this monolith. It's known as the Lanson. It's 15 feet high. And it's the key to this entire architectural structure, right? We have this large sunken courtyard, you proceed up, and then down into the dark to this Lanson. It's very structured. It's, again, really moving bodies in space in a very particular way. So you come from outside and then you head into these very dark corridors. Now there are lights in them if you went to visit, but of course there were not at the time. They'd be very dark. They're located between two rivers. They're sunken underground. What's the experience of a human being if they're inside this spot?
I think it would be really claustrophobic.
It definitely feels like it'd be claustrophobic. These are narrow hallways, right? And there's so many of these little bitty hallways. Great. What's happening with that claustrophobia?
Yeah, it just feels like a catacomb. It's like dark and depressing. It's like
yeah, you're
just kind of
descending into
panicking.
the depths, right? You're just descending into the depths. You come out of this outer courtyard with these hundreds of other practitioners. You guys are now being filed little by little into this really dark space. We know from different carvings at the site, these carvings in particular, and others I'll show you in a second, that the practitioners had, you see these little shells? Two types of shells. They're coastal shells. We'll get to why these people look like they do in a second. But first of all, they have these shells, right? And there was a practice of moving through those dark channeled spaces and clacking these shells together. So you have this loud clacking, clacking, repeated clacking. It's going to happen in a pattern. You're down under the earth, and you are down actually with the water table. So underneath this temple, there are a series of streams and water pathways. So when you're down in here, you're hearing the roaring of that river moving underneath the building. People are clacking these shells together as you move in darker and darker spaces. And it's not only just like random shells. People did incredible carving on these shells. They were sacred and very special objects that they brought with them. You can imagine the time and work. And there's really a large amount of symbolism carved into these shells. Here we have kind of a serpent shape, and we have, again, this sort of half human, half animal figure. What in the world is going on in this place, right? It's not what we think about when we think about the pyramids in Egypt, right? Which are burial spaces, and you might have one person inside there, and you might have a ceremonial procedure of bringing the pharaoh to that pyramid to be buried. This is not that. This is really like a full body performance happening. When you go to this site for worship, you are going for a full-on sensorium. It's more like a rave than it's going to be like anything we recognize as a religious practice. And we know that for a couple of reasons. First, let's take a moment on bas-relief. See these different stones here, that outer circular sunken courtyard that I showed you. Inside that sunken courtyard, when the practitioners are standing in there before the sun rises at dawn, before the sun comes up out of the darkness, giving these people this surreal experience. All the stones around that sunken courtyard are carved with 2 or 3 different things. One, we have a spotted jaguar, which you see in the image in the left. We have another sort of combination of a snake humanoid figure. And then we have these human figures that look like this. Tell me what you see when you look at this image. What stands out about this figure, which is just really the drawing of this bas-relief.
I think the snakes on his head are kind of interesting, just because I feel like snakes have been brought up a lot. So that seems like it's something important to them.
Absolutely.
Symbolize why.
Yeah, great point. We've got snakes in this kind of headdress that becomes part of the hair, right? And you're right on. It's a very important religious symbol for them. What else?
And then isn't the jaguar important too? Because it's the apex predator in the jungle in that area.
Yeah, excellent. Absolutely. And we see that jaguar represented in these kind of fangs, right? What else?
I think it's interesting how the body is front facing, but it looks like the head is from a profile view.
Excellent, excellent. Right, so we have this complex drawing, right, that is trying to incorporate something of the whole body. And it's not only just the whole body, there are a couple of different bodies happening here. And then we have this. Everyone around that sunken courtyard is carrying one of these. It's a San Pedro cactus, and it is wildly hallucinogenic. So we know just from the imagery itself, what happened in this space is that people would get up before dawn, they'd go into that sunken courtyard, they would imbibe this San Pedro cactus in one way or another. They would get high as a kite, wait for the sunrise to come up, and then they go down into this crazy cave. They're clacking their shells, the water is roaring. It's just crazy town in there, right? And what are they going for? Go ahead. Excuse me.
Sorry, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So why is the Middle American religion like the symbol of the religion is intentionally scaring people, while Western religion, their gods is more like a beloved, like you will never see Jesus in this kind of figure with like snakes as his hair and like nails all over his fingers, all that stuff. What do you think is the difference that creates this type of divisions?
Yeah, so this is a great point. So first of all, this Chavin religion is very particular to this region. It does begin to carry over into some Mesoamerican practices, but this is kind of a local It's often called a cult, but a local area of practice, right? Also, I think it's, and I welcome other people to join in here, but it has to do with the time period. We're looking at 7,000 years ago. If we think about the start of Christianity, it's thought of as 2,000 years ago, right? But in that same region where Christianity was founded, there were old beliefs and practices. In particular, if we think about the Old Testament, right, that God is ferocious. The Old Testament God is not kind and loving. He's ferocious and vicious, and people are getting thrown, you know, to their neighbors to be sacrificed. It's wild times back in these ancient days, almost for every practice. As things become more modern, they start to shift based on the hopes and beliefs of the people, right? So our very modern idea of the Christian God is super recent, this loving, caring, kind intercessor. That's really only happened in the last 200 years, actually. So it's not really Mesoamerica that's unique. It's really just like the time period, the slice of time that we're looking at when we think about religious practice. Does anyone else have something they'd like to contribute to that? Great question. Okay, so as these people are in their trance, they're doing their thing, they're going down this long, narrow hallway over here, they come to this, which is a stela or a stele. And it's another term for a carved monolith, right? We need to look at a few terms here. We've got the monolith with this giant stone situation. A stele is a carved version of that, and it's carved in a method called bas-relief, which is where you take an otherwise 2D object or 2D surface, even if it's a 3D object, 2D surface, and you carve in a very shallow way. If it was a full sculpture, you'd be carving all the way through the stone. A bas-relief just carves into the top layer. And you'll see that a little bit more in detail. So you come down that narrow pathway and you end up with this guy, which is 15 feet tall. So think like standard human height is going to be 1/3 of it. And he's decorated, or it is decorated in bas-relief. Certainly not he. This figure is decorated in bas-relief with this type of imagery. Again, there is a lot going on there. We have, again, the combination of that jaguar with these fangs. We have snake imagery coming up and out of the head. We have more faces up here. If you were going to describe this image as either like calm or energetic, which one are you going for?
Energetic.
Yeah, there's a lot of motion on the piece. Excuse me, I cut someone off.
I said energetic too.
Yeah, excellent. So there's just a lot of things going on this piece. So you don't look at it in kind of like quiet contemplation. And in addition to that, up above where this piece is located, back here on this image, you can see it. There's an opening in the top. And a series of priests this gets gory, and I'm not trying to relish in the gory, but I just want to point out just how sensory oriented this architecture is. At the top, there's some sort of blood sacrifice going on, generally thought to be an animal that's been sacrificed, so that when you look at this crazy 15-foot tall thing, again, you are not in your rational mind, and there's blood pouring down on it. It's just this wild religious experience. All of which is thought to be set up because the region underwent a huge period of drought. And the people were coming up with every sort of practice that they could to plead to the gods for rain. So they're making the sound of raindrops with their strongest shells as they go in. They've got this rushing water underneath the building itself. The whole entire site has been set up to recreate their desire for rain, right, in one form or another. And of course, during this period, again, actually I misspoke, Howard, I'm so sorry. This was at 1200, this was around 2500 to 1200 BCE. At this time, animal sacrifice is part of lots and lots of religious cultures around the world where this is happening. Whew. This is what it looks like today. From the outside, it has long been battered by rain, weather, theft. And there's a whole other layer on the site. That was the practice. What I just led you through is the practice in the old temple. The practice in the new temple. I do want to show you that just for a minute. Which by new we mean, maybe 200 years later. Sorry for the dizzying backtrack there. That new practice is indicated by these two different separations of granite here on the front. We've got this very white granite on the left, or this dark black, almost obsidian on the right. By the time this practice that was happening on the right side of the temple was a little bit old hat, they moved over to something new, where they were trying to integrate two different dichotomies. And this could be any type of dichotomy, day and night, male and female, any sort of binary you can think of. They were taking that experience on the exterior that we have, two very different things, and as you moved into the temple, down into that, again, series of mazes, all of that was supposed to disappear. Gender, at the time there wouldn't have been a racial binary because this is all one people from a very tiny region. But male and female, day and night, light and dark, being merged and falling away in a very non-binary way as they entered that temple for practice. Okay. Where are we going with this? Why am I showing you this? What I want to do today on this first day of thinking about art and architecture from Latin America is to enrich our idea of what's happening here. From these very, very early populations, 7,000 years ago, it's not just functional, right? It's not only that they were making things that they needed for their daily life. There is a theatrical construction happening at Chavin that is meant to move practitioners in a particular way through a particular set of space for a desired outcome for the community. What does it take to make all that happen? In order to build a site of this magnitude, what do you need?
Mass labor.
A lot of labor. You need a lot of man hours, a lot of women hours, a lot of everybody hours, right? Putting this together. And that lets us know that there was some sort of hierarchy. There's some sort of power structure, at least organizational structure, right? That's drawing people together for this purpose. And you need a unifying belief. You need something for everyone to get behind in order for these buildings to take shape. So we have art and architecture as a unifying center. It's an economic center. It draws people to the region. There's a trade of goods because people are coming for that religious practice. It's a spiritual center, and it's probably a political unifier, right? And then we have this symbolic nature of the art and architecture inside that really goes beyond, I like snakes. I put a snake rug in my door. It's far more involved, far more well-planned and structured than that. Okay, great. This was a lot. Questions, comments? When you begin to wonder out of this whole thing what you need to know for your exam, I set it up on those very first slides where I have for you, like, here are the sites, here are the technical terms, here are the tools. Those are the things you'll review before the test, which comes up later in September. All right, thanks for your participation today. Let me know if you have any questions moving forward. Y'all will watch the recording on Wednesday, which, as you can see, it will publish after class. And I look forward to seeing you next Monday.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You.